Good evening and welcome to our Sundays with Soul broadcast, where I am going live every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time to bring you inspiration, motivation, and dedication to revolutionizing education through ongoing support of culturally responsive teaching and leadership. I am your host, Dr. Melanie Desmond Battles, educator, lifelong learner, educational advocate, mother of two teenage daughters in public schools, past classroom teacher, and instructional leader since 2008, and current instructional leader and educational consultant. I am an instructional coach and leader for educators and teachers and leaders who are in public schools, private schools, and charter schools across the globe. And we do all of that through my company, Scholars for the Soul, an educational solutions firm. Before I dive into this content, we are a fairly new firm that has been doing this work of private consulting and coaching with school leaders and teachers for the last 4 years. Our goal right now is to expand our reach. And what we want to do is normalize culturally responsive teaching and leadership across the globe. And you can actually help us to reach our goal. We are currently at 50 subscribers on YouTube and would appreciate it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel to help us get to 500 subscribers over the next couple of months. We also want to reach more people here on LinkedIn. And so we would love to connect with those educators who are ready to join us in our mission to revolutionize education and this system by providing culturally rich and thought provoking instruction that actually centers the genius of our students by supporting the competency and the confidence of the teachers and instructional leaders who support them on their professional growth journeys. So here's what you can do. You can help us by liking this video and even reposting it on your feed with the hashtags culturally responsive teaching and culturally responsive leadership. All right. We appreciate you for following us along this journey and helping us to serve the academic and social emotional needs of our students and their teachers and adult staff. So today, let's get into it. We are going to dive into our first session entitled How to Still Be You While Being an Instructional Leader. And this is a call for radical self-acceptance and how it connects to your instructional leadership capacity. So join us in our sessions every Sunday for 30 minutes or less. But tonight we're going to learn the barriers that are stopping you from connecting to your teacher team. We'll dive a little bit into how code switching is stifling your team growth and learn how to embrace your unique personality while also being a professional. So to give you a little bit of background, during my educational journey as a classroom teacher, I can remember my experience with well-developed school leaders who actually saw the potential in me. They saw my passion for our youth, and they cultivated a space of belonging and acceptance for my radical ideas to teach the whole child by centering culturally responsive teaching as my norm. Though I had no clue, I didn't even know about these researchers, such as Dr. Geneva Gay, researcher and practitioner of culturally responsive teaching, the grandmother, Dr. Gloria Latsing Billings, of culturally relevant pedagogy. And I had just began to dive into the work during my dissertation of Zaretta Hammond, who is an educational researcher and practitioner of culturally responsive teaching that actually centers the brain's way of processing information that includes culture, cognition, which is how we think, memories, and the emotional experience of the learners, so that we help our students identify as learners, because as she has so eloquently stated time and time again, only the learner learns. I was blessed to be given the space to explore these innovative and radical ways under really great leadership, and it helped me to develop equitable instruction that centers my care and priority of the whole student rather than seeing teaching as simply a technical career that typically decenters the humanity of the young humans that we are blessed to serve. This included me piloting some social emotional learning programs as an instructional leader and as an educator, such as youth town halls, partnering with these community organizations that we would bring into the schools that would bring awareness to various social issues, and developing youth clubs that would motivate and encourage those young people to contribute and celebrate their genius and bring that attitude into the learning space. And while those experiences gave me a lot of room to grow and develop as a culturally responsive teacher, I also endured the tenure of toxic instructional leadership. It didn't feed my soul nor my intellect. There were many times I worked within a divided culture and climate that plotted teachers against one another. People became envious of the genuine connections that I made with our young people. So envious that they even questioned how students could be excelling in my class and not theirs. One of the consistent themes in both the healthy and the toxic work environments was that I noticed that there was a lack of focus on developing my pedagogy and the pathways for learning that actually would help young people to develop the courage and tenacity and perseverance to work beyond the instructional frustration that came when learning something new. I began to see our young people. They were always learning something, but they needed me to guide them through a culturally responsive approach on how to position themselves as lifelong learners who knew how to muddle through productive struggle and be proud of themselves for the progress they were making along the learning continuum. Tell me in the comments, have you experienced a healthy or toxic work environment as a teacher in the classroom? Comment healthy or toxic, or both in the comments below. Once I ventured into instructional leadership, as I was motivated by one of these healthy environments where a fellow veteran teacher and a strong instructional leader actually encouraged me to apply and move into instructional leadership, I noticed that many of the meetings that we had and other tasks that we were given as instructional leaders had very little to do with moving the needle to closing the instructional equity gaps. And that's a gap where student learning is not actually tapped into strongly because there's a lack of strong and productive tier one instruction. And the more I talked with other educational leaders and instructional leaders and teachers across the country, I noticed that this was not just isolated to my school, but to many others that came across or that are in this country. It then became my duty to focus on building my capacity as a culturally responsive school leader. And I had to do this by partnering with the teachers in my building to attend to their current needs and provide them with strong instructional practices and ways of being to be explored and sometimes dismantled and unlearned in order to relearn effective ways of being that would strengthen their identity as a teacher, because they could actually go from talking to students to actually seeing and teaching them and seeing the offspring of their work, right? So we're not just talking to students and getting up and presenting content, but we're actually teaching and seeing that teaching manifest in their hard work that they put in. But let me be real, this required a lot of internal work, and it's what I like to call soul care and soul work. I had to do this work. I had to dig deep. I had to excavate the norms and traditions and culture that inform my perspective of what I thought it meant to teach, to lead in terms of identity, and to go from a classroom teacher working in silos to this new professional identity as an instructional leader in my school. And it was a lot of learning that had to take place. But what I found out about myself is that we as humans, we all have needs. Some of those needs are for physical safety, the need for our basic needs like food and shelter and water to be met, but more deeply, our psychological needs needed to be accepted, validated, and to feel as though we belong. And sadly, our school systems are not traditionally designed to meet these needs, and neither is much of the other professional world. We're expected to produce like we are machines in a factory without much regard to our human nature. And this gap lies within our ability to mesh our personal and professional identities. So because this gap exists and persists within these traditional structures, Many instructional leaders struggle to live from their authenticity and develop an internal system that calls them higher to meet the need of their young people and serve the adults who teach and serve those young people. And the struggle is apparent and the struggle is very real. And we see this when we see teachers' teams that are led by instructional leaders that are disconnected, in turmoil, they're enduring personality clashes and conflicts. They're not meeting to work towards a common goal of closing these literacy and math gaps that leave many of our students, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, in a deficit space where they are not being served well and are not able to tap into their identity as a lifelong learner who can identify their own genius and see it in action in every classroom they enter. The reason this struggle exists and persists is because we are used to operating within a culture that promotes this constant sense of urgency, perfectionism, either or binary thinking, and that there is only one way of being, one way of thinking, and one way of doing that defines teaching and learning. And this type of culture of toxicity creates strong barriers to a strong and emotionally aware and resilient teacher team. And you need a strong, emotionally aware, and resilient teacher team to actually carry out the normalizing of culturally responsive teaching in your schools and your districts. It's also unhealthy for you as an instructional leader if you have not been made aware of how it can show up in your schools and classrooms. Allow me to give you a few examples of these barriers and how this can show up with teachers in our classrooms and their interactions with students, and how that can directly show up, if you're not careful, in your day-to-day interactions with teachers through your instructional leadership. So whether you are watching live or catching the replay, I want you to reply in the comments to any of these things I'm about to name that you have personally experienced, either as a teacher or as an instructional leader, and share your thoughts as you hear these four barriers and their explanations on how they could be showing up in your past or even your present experience as an educator. So let's start with number one, a constant sense of urgency. This can lead to rush decision making, prioritizing speed over thoroughness, and creating a stressful environment for both teachers and students. Teachers may feel pressure to cover material quickly, resulting in these shallow learning experiences. And if you really assume this way of being and this belief system, that means you are disconnected. It shows up as disconnected from the humanity of your teachers and how exhausted and overworked they are in actually trying to pursue these unrealistic deadlines, being pushed by these directives, having to pursue completing these tasks, all in this effort to have something done so quickly. Okay. And this is not actually integrated seamlessly with what teachers are already doing. So it seems like there's always too much on teachers' plates. Let's go to barrier number two, perfectionism. In a classroom setting, perfectionism can manifest as high expectations that are actually unrealistic or unattainable for all students. It may lead to a focus on grades and outcomes rather than the beauty and joy of the learning process itself. Students may feel discouraged or afraid to take risks and even make mistakes. When teachers feel the pressure from their instructional leaders for a perfect classroom with a perfect lesson plan, a perfect scripted curriculum, and perfectly behaved students, especially when there's an observation or evaluation that's occurring, this creates a disconnection from seeing students as humans with flawed ways of being that can sometimes, and in many cases, oftentimes be unpredictable. Okay. So if you've experienced or have really been engaged in barrier number one, which is the constant of urgency, type those words in the comment. If you got more you want to tell us about that, put it in the comments below. Also, if you've dealt with this perfectionism, put that in the comments as well. So now we're going into barrier number three, either or binary thinking. This type of thinking can limit creativity and critical thinking by framing issues in black and white terms without considering nuance or alternative perspectives. It may result in rigid teaching methods and assessments that don't account for diverse learning styles and backgrounds. When teachers are not given space during PLCs, which are also known as professional learning communities or professional development sessions, to see their identity as teacher researchers who are working to create and sustain environments that produce an expression of student genius, they don't have the opportunity to understand that flexibility is required for humans, teachers working with unpredictable students. Our humans, we affectionately call our babies or our students or our young people or our scholars, right? So if you're not cultivating and normalizing this mode of thinking and being, it creates space for disconnection between teachers and the instructional leaders of that teacher team. Lastly, the belief in only one way of being, thinking, and doing. This can lead to a lack of appreciation for diversity and different ways of learning and expressing knowledge. It may result in a curriculum that marginalizes certain cultures, experiences, and identities, reinforcing this narrow view of what is considered valid or acceptable. As an instructional leader, you must also consider and prioritize that humans who teach, affectionately known as teachers, come from different modes of being, learning, and expressing that should be honored, acknowledged, and valued in your school by normalizing that there are multiple ways to derive knowledge, exchange knowledge, grow from one another, and to value that diversity by including those differences and fostering belonging for those spaces when meeting either individually or as a team working with teachers. So, just to recap, if you have experienced any of these barriers, a constant sense of urgency, perfectionism, either or binary thinking versus both and approach, or this belief in only one way of being, thinking, and doing, I want you to put that barrier in the comment below. Let me know. And if you want to give a little bit about that experience and how it impacted you as a teacher or as a student, even or as an instructional leader, feel free to put that in the comments below. Now, what I want us to understand is that normalizing culturally responsive teaching is not just on the teacher, but it is organically normalized and sustained when culturally responsive school leadership is a priority. This means that your identity matters. What you were taught as this role of a professional in your position right now, it matters. How you were taught to engage or even not taught with the teaching staff and other adults in your building, it matters. It is your responsibility to recognize what are the norms that have informed your personal and professional mental models. And then you need to identify if they are fostering liberation or producing a prison that stifles the creativity and competency of your teachers while naturally doing the same with your students. Let me be completely honest and transparent with you all because these barriers have taken up deep and girthy roots in our traditional school systems. They are so insidious that if you are not already on this path of unpacking and unlearning these traits, then it's going to take some deep reflection for you to see how this is showing up in your leadership. My challenge for you is to take a survey of your teacher teams and ask them if they feel like any of these four barriers I just explained show up in the way they are supported from their instructional leadership team. Be sure that this survey is anonymous because you really want to garner this authentic feedback that will let you know how deep your school culture is in these ways of being that have created a barrier to closing the instructional equity gaps that you're experiencing with students who are performing below grade level expectations, both academically and behaviorally. Now, outside of the cultural barriers that we just went over, there is another barrier that is worth mentioning, and it is the lack of quality feedback from instructional leaders to teachers. I remember when I used to be observed or evaluated, and it seemed like most of the time it was so they could check off that they have completed this task of observing and evaluating a teacher off the long list of teachers that were charged to observe and evaluate. Sometimes I would receive little or no feedback at all. And when I did receive feedback, it was simply to remark that I'd done a good job, or that they liked what I did in the classroom, or that my board configuration was not right, which I never understood how that helped with instruction. But I digress. Rarely did I ever receive feedback on how to actually strengthen my instruction. No feedback on how to ignite student learning, how to chunk instruction to reduce cognitive load, how to allow students time to process the new information so that it moves from short to working to long-term memories, nor any ways to review information that would help students retain and even go deeper with the content. This type of feedback is vital. If you didn't notice or you don't know, this is reflective of the Ready for Rigor framework, coined and developed by Zaretta Hammond, and can be found in Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, an amazing book in my holy text to the work that I do with teachers and leaders across the nation. This type of feedback is vital, and it's helped so many of the schools and teachers that I've worked with as a consultant, because it actually helps them develop a keen eye for quality instruction that impacts the cognitive capacity of students and stretches their brain. It is so apparent, and it's unfortunate, that instructional leaders are not given a lot of support on how to do this. And this is from my own experience as a teacher and leader to my current experience as I'm partnering with schools and evaluating how these instructional leadership teams are actually providing or not substantial and sustainable support to teachers, because the goal is to close the instructional equity gap. The challenge I have for you now is to identify the ways in which your instructional leadership actually manifests the change in the way a teacher teaches to the soul and intellect of their students. And let's be clear, the soul is the mind, is the will, is the emotional area of that student, right? How many more students were engaged after you worked with this teacher or your instructional leadership team? How much more aware is the teacher of how to unpack the standard and scale the learning content so that everyone can meet the end goal? How much more confident is the teacher on how to differentiate instruction so that it is equitable and it lifts the intellectual capacity of every student, even the hard ones? If you are honest with yourself and you notice lack there, you're on the right track. I created a feedback checklist that I use, and let me bring that link up to the screen for you. Let me get it there. Okay, it's scrolling there at the bottom. But I created this feedback checklist that I use with teachers to help provide the right type of wise feedback that will center teacher autonomy, their hopes and dreams for their impact as a teacher, and how to grow as a facilitator for learning. I have placed the link here on the screen. It's there at the bottom, but it's also, I'm going to put it in the comment section so you can grab this freebie. Feel free once you get the freebie to reach out to me via DM if you've got any questions, and I'd be happy to help you cross this barrier and begin to see growth with your teacher teams and students. Okay. Now let's move into our second point, which is how code switching is stifling your teacher growth. Code switching can be described as attending to the need to change or shift one's behavior, their normal ways of speaking, and interacting with others to fit the code or accepted way of being. That oftentimes it negates your own authenticity, and it prescribes to this notion of masking and performing. Typically, this term has been used for Black people or people of color, but to be honest, it can apply to anyone who dishonoring their true character and identity in order to fit into a mold of what they believe or even know to be acceptable in that environment. Now, the problem with code switching is that it moves you further away from who you were designed to be, whether that's quirky, different, unique, fun, outgoing, creative, innovative, all the ways that you were led to believe were not valuable enough for you to show up just like that in the workplace. Now, to be clear, there are parts of ourselves that we can examine and determine do not serve us well or the people around us. If some of your character traits are causing psychological or emotional harms to other people and even to yourself, there's nothing wrong with cleaning those areas up. Like, let's be real. But be sure to ask yourself this first. Will this soul clearing work help me to love me more? Or is it so that others can love me more? And that's a complex question. It can be both and. It may need to be only one as you consider this aspect of your soul that you want to clear and clean up. And I'm going to be honest, you all, this work is so deeply layered, and we don't have enough time today to dive into its complexity. But I want to leave you with this conversation, honoring your identity as a human. Here are a few collective, reflective questions that can help you do that. Okay. So I want you to think about these questions. And this is our last point for this session. Think about your passions. What do you feel passionate about? What brings you joy? Who else is present in those moments of joy? How do those passions or joy bring joy to the world, both near and far from you? Here's another question. What is your value system? If you had to identify at least 3 core values that you want to uphold for this time in your life, what would they be? Are they all only self-serving? Do they also help to liberate others, to explore the best parts of themselves? Do these values uphold love and center integrity and morality? And lastly, this is the hardest one for a lot of us. It used to be hard for me. What is great about you? What is great about you? What type of impact have you made on the world, your family, your friends, your professional circles? If you're not sure, sometimes we can get stuck in our deficiencies and we fail to see our greatness. Ask those around you. Find out how you bring joy to others. This affirming work will bring you back to answering the call for radical self acceptance. This work of instructional leadership is not an easy task. I have been there, done that, and writing a book, literally. But it can become especially hard to stay true and authentic to your identity and your calling to serve when you are tasked with countless deadlines, endless directives, initiatives to oversee, and gaps to close. But if you are operating underneath a toxic culture that centers and promotes, we're going back, y'all, to this constant sense of urgency, perfectionism, either or binary thinking, and that there is only one way of being, thinking, and learning, then you will not only create barriers and disconnect between potential of your impact as an instructional leader, but you will also lose you. And what good is it to gain the acceptance of your professional world and the expectation of this leadership role if you lose your soul, y'all? Be sure your soul is at the top of your priorities and your values, and that you're actively working on, ways to attend to your own routines of soul work and soul care. The more intentional you are about that as an instructional leader, the more quickly and succinctly you close the gap. Sorry, you all, I'm outside enjoying nature, and of course, there are cars passing by. But the more intentional you are about that as an instructional leader, the more quickly and succinctly you will close this gap between school leadership and your teacher teams. There is enough toxicity in our world without our school system going up in flames. We need instructional leaders like you to stand up for our teachers, stand up for yourself, advocate for fairness by disrupting those barriers that are leaving all educators, regardless of the title, burnt out and leaving the field in large numbers. We need instructional leaders like you to realign your personal and professional identity and recognize the value in who you were created to be and how you can articulate your value within your instructional leadership role. Just because you're in leadership does not mean you have to sacrifice who you are and what's important to you. Don't get trapped into these toxic traditions of this system, y'all. These traditions ignore and neglect our humanity as a collective, and they devalue the emotional and physical capacity we have as humans. We are only designed to do so much before we need to take this time to rest, time to think, time to reflect, and time to be reinvigorated, recharged, restored, so that we can respond to the challenges within our classrooms that reflect the growing needs of our students, both academically, socially, and emotionally. Thank you for staying with me for our first episode of Sundays with Soul. If this episode inspired you, pricked your heart, or some kind of critical thought, or caused you to pause, please be a dear, please be a support, and let me know in the comments how it resonated with you. Remember, every like, every comment, every post, every subscription to our YouTube channel is just another opportunity for us to spread these messages of hope, coupled with strategy to actually visualize and actualize the dream for higher learning and joy in learning for not just our students, but for the teachers and leadership staff that are responsible for the day-to-day learning and culture of belonging, acceptance, and best of all, love, y'all. It's all about the love. Feel free to visit our website, scholarsforthesoul.com. You can connect with us via DM or in the comments. You can also join our community of soul scholars, one who is a lifelong learner and critical thinking, striving to connect the soul to learning. And I will see you all next Sunday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time.